don't cry. I'm burning down this town, so if you see me...
And welcome back to the Spicy Sports Show with Sam Stern and Thomas Estrada, coming to you live from Portland, Oregon and Elizabethtown, Pennsylvania. It's about 8:07 on the West Coast, so about 11:07 where you are, from my guess anyway. And then, so what we're going to do here is talk about some college football. So before we go into the scores from over the weekend, we'll go into the rankings as it stands right now. Alabama, as we mentioned in the last segment, number one in the country, and by far, it's almost unfair how they're just demolishing opponents. Ohio State's number 2, Michigan 3, Clemson number 4, Washington out here up in Seattle number 5, Texas A&M is 6, Louisville 7, Nebraska 8, Baylor's 9, and rounding out the top 10 is Wisconsin, losing a close one to Ohio State over the weekend. So kind of going over some scores here from week number 7 in college football. So if it pulls up here. Just some of the scores here. Louisville coming back. Lamar Jackson, arguably the Heisman Trophy candidate, and right now it's not even close, although the gap's going to narrow down as the weeks move forward. Pretty good performance in a 24-14 win over Duke. Now, Alabama, they played Tennessee. Last week on the podcast, I picked Tennessee to upset Alabama, and how stupid was I? Winning 49-10. Jalen Hurts has been phenomenal. I mean, 143 yards in the air, 132 yards, and 3 scores passing. Tomas, is Jalen Hurts a dark horse Heisman candidate at this point? And did that game kind of put him on the map for him?
I would say he's in the conversation, but for better or worse, I think a lot of voters are going to have reservations about making him one of the finalists necessarily, simply because I think most people are aware the team around him is so freaking good. So I think there's a lot of thought of, he's been playing very well, but with that O-line, those receivers, and that running back, and then a defense that keeps the other team off the field, well, hey, you can just be a competent quarterback as far as skill set, and you would still perform very well. So I think that the fact that Alabama is so good might actually play a little bit against him as far as his individual hopes for the Heisman. Now I don't know, like unless he's got a collapse in the second half of the season, I think the Louisville QB he's in his own league, and it's one of those players that I just love watching him play. I mean, he's explosive, he's exciting. I mean, he looks from a distance, he just kind of looks lanky and wiry, but you look at him run, he's a strong runner too. Just one of those guys that can take over a game and just make it electrifying every time. So I would agree with you that he's far and away the leader, and I think it would be good for college football for a team like Louisville to get a Heisman Trophy winner. He's, I think, good. Like players like that just make the whole game more exciting.
Oh yeah, he's one of the most electrifying players we've seen in quite a long time. Probably, in my opinion, since maybe Reggie Bush, as overall electrifying on the offensive end of the ball. Ohio State going out to beat Wisconsin 30-23. It was a really close game. It was at Wisconsin, but Ohio State looking good. J.T. Barrett 17-29 in a score. Pretty good there. Clemson defeating NC State 24-17. It wasn't the best game. I thought Clemson was, and I quote, going to pull a Clemson again, but luckily they pulled it out over NC State in overtime. And then Nebraska beating Indiana 27-22 in a close one. Nebraska's 6-0 for the first time since 2002, and that was at the end of their really good run in the late 90s and early 2000s when they had a lot of mobile QBs and were competing with Miami for national titles there. So is Nebraska, Tomas, again, I know that you haven't watched a lot of college football this season, but again, at 6-0, it's pretty impressive, and Tommy Armstrong's a pretty good quarterback. Is Nebraska a dark horse to contend for the top 4 at the moment?
Well, I think it's very tricky because I think it's one of those things where, like, after the top 4, I think there's a pretty severe gap when you get to the bottom half of that top 10, especially when you get to like the outer half of the top 10. I think without a doubt, Alabama's a very strong one. I think both Ohio State and Michigan look really good, and Clemson, I mean, they made it to the championship game last year. I mean, you still got Deshaun Watson, you still got a very good, solid team. So I think that's a very fair top four up there. But then when you get to the next group, you've got some teams that perhaps, I mean, teams like Washington. I mean, when's the last time you'd heard about Washington being anywhere close to elite at football? I think it had been a long while, and I mean, A&M had been, I mean, they've been picking it up a little bit, but they've been pretty inconsistent in recent years. And then you mentioned Wisconsin was still up there, and they have already lost to Ohio State, and they lost to Michigan as well, if I'm not mistaken. Granted, they were both close games, but that kind of tells you that you're keeping a team that already has those losses so high in the rankings. I think the voters don't really have that many choices. I think there's a pretty sharp drop-off as you get into that, like number 6 or 7 through 15. Yeah, I would say with Nebraska, I mean, they deserve their current ranking just because there's not that many teams that have proven to be any better. But I think most people feel that if they have any hopes of getting to the playoffs, I mean, they've got to win their conference, and you've got Ohio State and Michigan there. So I think it's going to be very daunting for them. Then again, for Michigan, as good as their ranking is and as strong as they have looked, I mean, 5 of their first 6 games were at home. I think that might be a little deceiving, and it might lead people to think they're a little bit better than they are.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think I agree with your statement that Nebraska is at number 10 because no one else has really proven themselves. When you look at the teams that have just, so quite frankly, fallen off the map with just a stinging loss somewhere, whether it be Houston, Florida State has suffered a couple losses. Miami was in the top 10 at one point. Now they're not, thanks to two losses in a row. I agree. Nebraska's a dark horse, but again, I think it's more a default because of where teams have fallen week to week, and it's October. You know, everyone says after September, oh, you think Louisville's going to go undefeated, or imagine how many undefeated teams are going to be left in college football. What happens? But then October comes around, and then you see all these upsets every single October, and just come out of nowhere, and you never know. You can't explain it why. It's just that on any given Saturday, anything can happen.
I would agree. I would say there's been other years where I have seen perhaps a group of 8 teams that all look like legit contenders. I think more recently, what has really happened is Alabama has separated themselves so much from the rest of the field that I remember going back to the soccer conversation. There's a famous quote by English player Gary Lineker. And Lineker played for England back in the 80s and 90s, and he's a great player. But he said that soccer was a game where it was 11 versus 11, but at the end of the day, Germany always won. And I feel like these days in football, that's how it is. Yeah, it's 11 versus 11 at any given time, but at the end of the day, Alabama's going to win. I think right now the whole machine that they have is firing on all cylinders. You got the best coach in the nation with some excellent facilities, with top-of-the-line recruiting, so they're bringing in 4- and 5-star players in all positions. The moment some of their superstars go to the NFL, they just reload with more. And the ship is run so well, it's kept so efficient that it just makes it extremely hard for anyone else to compete. Curiously, the only team that I see as being able to give Alabama a run for their money is Ohio State, in my opinion. And I credit that to Urban Meyer. I really think he's the only coach that is anywhere close to, like, in the ballpark of being in the same league as Nick Saban. And he did prove a couple of years ago when Ohio State won the title. They were huge underdogs in that first playoff round going up against Alabama, and then it was an amazing game. I think it was like 42-35. They pulled it out with what was their third string quarterback at the time. So to me, Urban has proven that he does have the coaching ability to perhaps get over that hump. I still think that as far as program quality, Alabama is just at a whole other level compared to everybody else. So for me, it's kind of waiting patiently. I look at sort of like the rest of the field as best of the rest. Everyone is playing for best of the rest, but I think it's going to be very difficult for anybody to stop the tide from rolling.
So my next question is, Baylor defeated Kansas 49-7. Everyone expected that. Baylor's just a juggernaut offense. They're 6-0 and ranked number 11 in the country. Let's say that they go undefeated. Is it a possibility that their off-field allegations over the course of the last year and going back a couple years has hurt them enough to the point where if they go undefeated, is it possible that they could be kept out of the playoff?
It's a tricky political decision there. I don't know. I frankly would like, my guess is that they would not be kept out, but I can see why some people would think that they would. I'm curious as to your opinion on that one, Sam.
Yeah, I think overall, I mean, it's going to be tough. Look, and the committee's already mentioned that they're going to not keep them just strictly what happens on the field, and off the field, just out of it. And I get it. You know, and look, at the end of the day, you want the 4 best teams in the field. But again, those allegations have been pretty bad for Baylor. Their PR has taken a major hit. A lot of the players have transferred from Baylor, and yet they're still not bad. They're still rolling. Again, we're going to find out if they're going to keep up their undefeated streak. They play West Virginia, who's also undefeated at some point later in the season. They also play Oklahoma. So again, the time will tell whether or not even this is even a valid point. But overall, I think for Baylor, I would say they're going to keep them in, because I think it would be a bigger uproar overall, as much as it's probably not in the interest of college football to have them there. If they're one of the 4 best teams, keep them in.
Yeah, so I think about some of the scandals that have rocked college football, and a lot of the times it leaves you with a strange feeling when a team does not get at the time when the violations aren't discovered or they don't come out till after the fact. So thinking about Pete Carroll's USC teams, like you mentioned, Reggie Bush earlier, but there was a lot of shady stuff going on in the 2000s at USC, and eventually, Reggie Bush's Heisman got taken away. The one championship that they got in 2004 got taken away as well. But it kind of gives you this bittersweet feeling of, in terms of the history books, it was taken away, but the game was still played and they still won that game. So for me, I remember actually I was at the famous 2005 USC Notre Dame Bush game, and even though by all, you can make after the fact the game was vacated, due to the violations that the USC had. I was still there, and it still felt like a very painful loss. So I think even though decisions might be made later as to punishing a team or not, there's a lot of very real meaning to the game that's actually played. And I can see both sides of the argument, quite frankly. If an institution has been found guilty of violations, so they're very serious allegations, why give them that opportunity to go and win, and then perhaps you're depriving another team that did things by the rules, did things by the book from actually hosting the championship the way they would deserve to. But on the flip side, a lot of these players did nothing wrong, and they're winning. If you want to see the best 4 teams, and they're one of the best 4 teams, I agree. I think the backlash, the uproar, if they got kept out, would be very significant.
Yeah, no, I agree. It's like I said, it's a long way away, but it's definitely going to be in the minds of people as Baylor continue to move up the rankings, and they're going to, considering their schedule is really light up until when they play West Virginia and Oklahoma. Their non-conference schedule is terrible because that's the Big 12. They always like to schedule non-conference opponents that are pretty terrible unless you're Oklahoma. But I think for the most part, it's going to be tough because there is a moral ground that, again, there's a big uproar.